Hello everyone, Mrs. Trainer here. Today I want to kind of talk to you a little about some of the things that you're going to be looking for in your story assignment. So the first thing I want to look at here is the My Story Planning page that you had filled out yesterday. So if you didn't get this filled out, that's fine. You can still do that now. So the first thing you wanted to answer was, what was your story about? This is one simple little phrase just to tell us what you're talking about, basically. The second question is one that is a little bit confusing. It says, what does my reader need to know for the story to make sense? This is where you're going to need context clues. You're going to need background. Things that are not necessarily a part of the story, but if the reader doesn't know these things, your story's not going to make sense. So, for example, on mine here, I wanted to make sure that my reader knows that when snow melts in the spring, there is a lot of leftover gravel on the road, and street sweepers come to sweep it up, but they have to make two passes because otherwise there's a bigger mess than when they started. Also, this was a time before cell phones, so it's not like we could just, hop on a phone and call somebody for help. And we also lived close to the outskirts of town, just like my grandparents, so there was not a whole lot around, and there's not many houses, so it's not like we could just, run up to somebody's house and ask for help. Of course, the next question is pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy, who's involved, and then what are the main points I need to cover. This is basically a checklist for yourself just to kind of, remember what order you want to kind of tell the story in. So, you basically just start typing. All right, don't think of this as your 5-paragraph essay format. Don't get hung up on, your appeal paragraphs. This, you're just going to start typing. You're just going to write, and it can be a lot more of a relaxed tone. You can actually write more as if you were speaking. And so I started out here. I said, one day when I was 8 years old and my brother was 6, my parents suggested that we ride our bikes up to visit my grandparents. This was nothing strange or out of the ordinary, since we lived just down the road and around the corner from them. So I just wrote my ideas. I wrote what I wanted to say, knowing that this is a rough draft and that I can always go back and change anything. So once you get that done, you're going to be moving on to the next stage, which is going to be the editing stage. With the editing stage, what we're going to be looking at is just a few things, very simple things to kind of start out for this assignment in particular. So the first thing you're going to be looking for is capitalization. You need to make sure that the first letter of every single sentence is capitalized. Now see, obviously, I forgot to capitalize the T on this, so that is something I would need to go back and fix. Also, I have a name of a street here. I have City View Drive. That's the street my grandparents lived on. And I would need to then, of course, capitalize that. So I have here City View, and then I also have Drive that I would need to capitalize. So you just go through, look for that. So any names of places, any start of a sentence. Also, one that a lot of people tend to forget that is very, very, very important is anytime you say I. You must have a capital anytime you say I. So your plan would be to read through, find any words that need capitalized, make sure that you capitalize them. A really good trick for this is to switch your paper with somebody else, trade them, and read somebody else's paper, because you're more likely to pick up things like capitalization errors on somebody else's paper. Second thing you're going to be looking for is you're going to be looking for your end punctuation, meaning periods, exclamation points, question marks. Make sure every single sentence ends with one of those three. Question marks, obviously you're asking a question. A period comes after a statement. If you have a sentence that is particularly exciting or has a lot of emotion in it, you can add in an exclamation point. I would just caution you not to use too many of those. And then the last thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go and you're going to want to break your story into paragraphs, because that is also how you're going to be graded on the rubric. For paragraphs, a little rule of thumb is anytime you kind of shift gears, make it a new paragraph. Anytime you kind of have a transition word to move on to the next part of a story, make it a new paragraph. If you've been talking about the same thing for a very, very long time, break it up, find a good spot where it seems like there's a little natural pause, make it a new paragraph. Your reader does not want to read an entire wall of text like this. It is extremely difficult to read. It gets very tedious. Your reader starts to read things over that they've already read because there's no natural break. If you get stuck on the paragraphs, you can always ask somebody else to read your story over. Say, hey, where do you kind of feel like you naturally pause? And they can help you out with that. So if I look here at my story, and I say, you know, one day when I was 8 years old and my brother was 6, my parents suggested that we ride our bikes up to visit my grandparents. This was nothing strange or out of the ordinary since we lived just down the road and around the corner from them. Now, one thing that is very important to know is that both sets of grandparents lived on the same street, a few houses down from each other. They lived on a street named City View Drive, which is aptly named because it is the top of a very large hill that looks out over the city. So, we got up to see my dad's parents. Right here, this so becomes a transition word, and I'm moving out of my explanation of where my grandparents live into the actual story. So this here would be a great spot to make a new paragraph. Continuing on, it says, so we got up to see my dad's parents. This was never an easy ride. The only thing that ever kept us going was knowing how easy the ride home was going to be since it was all downhill. After visiting with them for a while, we stopped in to see my mom's parents. Then it was time to go home. We all got on our bikes and started to go. I could start a new paragraph here, or I could start one here where it says we decided to take the longer way home. Either one would make sense there. I just would prefer to start it here because then I'm transitioning into us getting on the bikes and starting to go home. So we all get on our bikes and start to go. We decide to take the long way home because it's a nice day out and my brother and I want to see the horses who live at the bottom of the hill. Everyone was in agreement, and so we hopped on our bikes and started to go. We noticed that there was a lot of loose gravel on the road, and this made sense since it was spring and all the snow had recently melted, leaving behind all the sand and dirt from the plows in the winter. My grandma had mentioned that a road sweeper had been around earlier, but that it had not come back for a second pass yet. This is very important because when snow melts in the spring, there is so much gravel on the road that street sweepers must make 2 passes. The first is to loosen up all the dirt and gravel, and the second is to get it off the road. Therefore, this meant that since it had not been by a second time, it had just loosened up all the gravel that was on the road. Well, once again, I have a transition word here. I have moved on from some explanation as to why this event is going to happen back into the actual event, so I would make a new paragraph here. Once you have done all of that, you've checked your capitalization, you've checked your punctuation, you've split your story into appropriate paragraphs, then you can just kind of go back and finesse. You can, make better word choices. You can clarify some of your pronouns. Once again, trading your paper with somebody else is a great way to do this. Have them read it, you read theirs, and then at the end say, what are some questions that you still have? Or as they're reading through, say, make a mark wherever you have a question, wherever there's something that you do not understand that to me makes perfect sense, but you not knowing the story, you need clarification on this particular point. And so get a friend to do that. You do that to the friend's paper, and then you will end up, with a story that's going to be split into paragraphs, that's going to have all the proper capitalization, that's going to have all the proper end punctuation, that's going to have a lot of detail because you have explained everything that is confusing to your readers, and it will be exactly what you need so that you can get a high score on this. So good luck. If you have any questions, of course, ask, and hopefully everything will go good for you.